Hey, change makers, welcome back to Sparking Innovation. This is a podcast from Provisio, the largest Salesforce consultancy focused solely on human services. I'm Tom Moran, here to inspire nonprofits and government agencies to drive change in their communities by embracing change in their organizations. Now, on this show, we talk a lot about the technology side of innovation. But as we dug into on our last episode about change management, people, of course, play a critical role in organizational transformation. Because after implementation, if the people who are using your new Salesforce solutions aren't fully capitalizing on them, you're just not going to get that much bang for your buck, right? And the same goes for the strategic planning that happens before an investment in new technology. If leadership isn't on the same page about what the organization's mission should be, or what metrics should be tracked, or honestly, even what solutions are needed from that technology, you're just kind of drifting without a paddle. Today, we're digging deeper into the strategic planning side of change management with Amitis Oskoui, Provisio's Director of Advisory Services. Her job is to ensure the long-term success of technology transformations through strategic diagnosis, data-driven insights, and continuous support. Amitis, welcome to the pod. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we know that nonprofits, need a clearly defined mission, right? But communities and conditions change over time, and that forces nonprofits to have to rethink what they're doing. And that seems like this sort of existential crisis that strikes at the heart of what these mission-driven organizations are doing. So how do you help them tackle that challenge? How do you help get organizations into alignment on their mission when they start to realize that maybe their initial reason for existing doesn't really match the reality of where they're going now?
Yeah, I mean, mission drift is a common challenge. I think more so today than ever with constant shifts in the landscape. But the challenge doesn't have to be a dire one. I think in reality, a shifting landscape means an organization needs to take a step back and ask, are we still solving the right problem in the right way? And do we have the data to help us make those decisions? One of the first indicators that a nonprofit may need to realign is when their data and decision making are out of sync. So if leadership is needing to make strategic choices, but their data isn't providing the right insights, it's often a sign that the organization needs to take a step back and reassess. And the key is really looking at the nonprofit as part of a broader ecosystem, a part of the broader ecosystem that is constantly evolving. And are asking the question, are we playing the role that makes the most sense? Are we positioned where we can have the greatest impact? So this isn't just about whether a mission is right or wrong. It's about understanding how to evolve without losing sight of the organization's core purpose. So it's about figuring out how do you leverage your core organizational differentiators and assets while evolving in response to that new reality. So I recently, worked with an organization that had been focused on direct service for years and years, but as the policy and funding landscape changed, they realized that they were really uniquely positioned to deepen in to leverage their deep understanding. They realized they were really uniquely positioned to leverage their deep understanding of their community's needs to have a seat at the policymaking table. And that moving to a hybrid model of direct service delivery and advocacy work really set them up to have the most impact. So this is where understanding and realigning mission as a positioning exercise is really important. A nonprofit's role isn't just about how they do their work, the specific programs and services they provide. It's about what change are they holding themselves accountable for making, by way of those programs and services, and how does that fit within a broader landscape of partners and change makers? The strongest nonprofits take the time to reassess these things strategically. And we call this, slowing down to go fast. It's about really ensuring the organization is focusing on what will have the greatest impact today. And when a nonprofit is really clear about its mission and its model of impact, it's then better positioned to gather the right data it needs to measure and understand where it's at in relation to that North Star. And it's much better positioned then to proactively evolve its work and make better, smarter, quicker decisions that advance the mission rather than remaining reactive to external changes.
Yeah, and so let's dig a little bit further into the data side of that, as you mentioned. So, I'm sure it can be tricky to ensure that that technology actually serves their long-term mission. So, how can organizations ensure that their data solutions and the data they have ultimately aligns with those long-term goals?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think one of the biggest challenges with technology investments isn't just choosing the right system. It's making sure it's actually helping an organization achieve that mission. So too often, I think nonprofits really invest in technology without first stepping back to ask, what do we need this system to help us understand? What decisions should this data be driving? The organizations that get the most value from their technology are the ones that start with strategy to help them define their system needs. Before even considering platforms, they need to define what data needs to be collected, how will their teams use it, and what insights will drive decision making. And technology really should serve that mission and not the other way around. When you have that foundation, then the question becomes one of identifying what systems are going to best position you to support your goals. For example, when you look at what, CRM systems like Salesforce are fundamentally designed to do well, tracking information about people and relationships. It sounds really basic, but it's actually one of the most powerful things a nonprofit can leverage is understanding the value of that and the value of that kind of a system. When organizations have a unified view of the people they serve across programs, services, and interactions, it really changes everything. Suddenly you're not just tracking transactions or outputs, you're seeing that full story of engagement, of impact, and the long-term outcomes of your organization's work on those people. So I think nonprofits recognizing that technology decisions, made today have long-term implications on their work and thinking about when organizations can, ground their technology choices in that strategy from the start, they're really designing for flexibility. They're designing for the future of their organization.
So once a nonprofit's mission is, clearly defined, it kind of comes time to reevaluate and redefine what their success metrics are going to be. So what's your advice to any nonprofits out there who are perhaps struggling to figure out what those new KPIs are going to be?
Yeah, I think, redefining success metrics can feel really overwhelming for organizations, especially when nonprofits have been measuring the same thing for years, often because funders require them. So the key, I think, is really this focus on shifting from measuring outputs to measuring outcomes. And what I mean by that is that many organizations track the number of clients served, workshops held or services provided. And those numbers really do tell an important part of the story, but they don't answer a bigger question, which is what changed in the lives of the people or the communities we serve as a result of our work. So a nonprofit that's focused on workforce development, for example, might be required to report the number of people who completed a job training, for example. But that doesn't tell them whether their programs and services helped people stay employed long term or increase their earnings over time. A more meaningful KPI might be the percentage of participants that are still employed after 6 months of a program, for example, or the wage growth of participants a year after completing the program. So those metrics really provide insight into whether the program is truly moving people toward an outcome around economic stability, for example, and they require a view into clients' journey over time. So how nonprofits should go about redefining their KPIs, I think there are a few key questions that can help. First is really asking, does this metric reflect the actual change we want to see in people's lives? And then does it help us make better decisions? A strong KPI should inform your strategy and not just fulfill a reporting requirement. And then finally, can we collect and track this data in a way that is really sustainable? If not, what adjustments need to be made to data systems or data collection processes to make that possible? And then I think another important shift is really moving beyond individual program impact and articulating organization-wide success. So what do we know about how our programs are working together in ways that amplify impact? Or how do we holistically achieve goals across our programs and services? And how does the combination of our work really affect change in a way that wouldn't otherwise happen on its own? So I think success metrics should really help answer those big picture questions, and that requires going beyond tracking results of single interventions or activities. And that's why it's so important to have technology and systems that are built to unify information across programs, to automate the connections that would otherwise get lost in, program silos, and to really help generate insights that aren't just retrospective, but actually guide future decision making.
Sure, yeah, that's really cool. And what are some other kinds of outcome-driven metrics that nonprofits are probably not tracking with those old systems that they have, but once they get Salesforce, they can begin to track.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that's
Yeah.
that's just like a whole different level of insight that you're able to grab.
Absolutely. A lot of nonprofits are not want for data, but they are starving for insights, right? So many of these legacy systems are built for tracking, again, transactions and not necessarily long-term engagement. So organizations end up reporting things like how many services they provided, at a particular workshop or event, for example, but that doesn't tell them much about who's coming back or what's actually working or where they need to adjust. So a modern, CRM system like Salesforce really shifts that. It's not about just logging interactions. It's about connecting the dots across programs. It's about tracking relationships over time and understanding how people move through services. And so I think there's a few key ways that nonprofits' insights from their data might shift. The first is that they might, start being able to track client engagement beyond a single touch point. A lot of nonprofits, again, can tell you how many people they served last year, but not necessarily how many people stayed engaged or accessed multiple programs or actually improved their lives in a meaningful or particularly qualitative way. Um, so with, a Salesforce, for example, they can do that. They can see who keeps coming back, what services they're using across, across their organization and what outcomes they're achieving. I think another key insight is looking at how programs interact, and seeing, how programs interact beyond their, great programs in their silos, but how do they work together to have even deeper impact? So being able to connect the dots there, did someone who completed job training also access financial coaching, and what did that do for that individual? So these insights can help organizations, again, be more intentional about their service delivery moving forward.
Okay, so great organizational culture is a challenging thing to create, and I'm sure it's like hard enough already to align leadership behind whatever that change is going to be in terms of a new vision and goals and implementing new technology to achieve those things. But to get staff on board is a whole different struggle, I'm sure. So how do you go about changing an entire organizational culture to embrace something that's like might be kind of new and scary for people ultimately?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is recognizing that technology adoption is more than implementing a new system. It's about recognizing the power of that technology to change the way people work and recognizing that authentic engagement of staff is paramount, and that there's no such thing as engaging staff too early. So no matter how well designed a tool is, if people don't understand why it matters and how it connects back to their work and what it enables them to do better, it won't be fully embraced. Um, I think that the organizations that are most successful treat technology implementation and adoption as an ongoing investment in their people. They provide continuous training, they create internal knowledge sharing processes. They make sure that the technology remains adaptable to their evolving needs. And I think change doesn't really stick unless people see themselves in it. So when staff feel included and empowered in bringing about that change from the start, the shift from resistance to adoption happens much more naturally. So I think one of the most important things that organizations can do is really make sure that they help people feel invested in the change, to help them see how it helps them and believe that it's going to make their work more impactful. And that's where communication and engagement is really critical. The most successful organizations aren't just announcing changes, they are co-creating it with their staff.
So let's talk about AI. Everyone is aware of how transformative it's going to be across human services, but it's important that before you actually start down that path, that you actually talk about what you really need from AI and why you're trying to leverage it in the first place, right? The strategic planning has to come first. So what would you say to nonprofits who are eager to leverage AI in their work right now, but aren't quite there yet?
Yeah, what I would say is this, AI should really be an extension of an organization's strategy and core purpose. So I think the biggest mistake nonprofits can make right now is to rush to adopt AI because it's a hot topic without first thinking about where it actually will create the most value for their mission. AI isn't, a strategy unto itself. It's a very powerful tool that should be deployed really intentionally to solve real challenges within an organization and for the communities that they are serving. So I think that a good starting point is identifying the highest impact use cases that are grounded directly in your organization's strategic goals. What is it that you are trying to achieve ultimately? And how can AI best support your organization in achieving those goals? How can AI, for example, help you strengthen the outcomes of your programs? How can it help you uncover those insights that deepen your understanding of the communities that you serve? It's not necessarily just about doing things faster, it's about doing them better and with greater impact. So we really got to think about where automation can strengthen that impact without necessarily replacing the human relationships and trust that is at the core of so much of nonprofit work. Um, and importantly, AI is really only as useful as the data and systems that are supporting it, right? So before nonprofits can fully benefit from AI powered tools in Salesforce, for example, they need to ensure that they've structured their data in a way that really reflects what's most important to measure and optimize. The goal isn't to collect more data, it's to collect the right data and to organize it and to make sure it flows across teams and systems to support that mission-driven decision making. And just as importantly, AI needs to be implemented ethically. I think many of the same risks that we're seeing that exist in the for-profit sector in AI adoption, bias in data models, lack of transparency, or other unintended consequences, I think it can have even greater stakes in nonprofits. Particularly in health and human services work. Organizations working with vulnerable populations need to really ensure that AI doesn't reinforce disparities or lead to biased decision making. So that's why staying rooted in the mission is so essential. Nonprofits need clear ethics guidelines and governance around AI use, making sure that it helps them serve their communities really fairly and in alignment with their organizational values.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of really incredible potential, and it's really exciting, but definitely a lot to consider in every stage of the process, particularly at the very beginning before you start to really go down the pathway to AI. So, Amitis, thank you so much for joining this episode of Sparking Innovation. This was really great.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me.
So, through strategic alignment and data driven insights and continuous support, Amitis ensures that the change implemented is impactful, sustainable, and closely aligned with the organization's mission and goals. So, if you work for a nonprofit or a state or local government and are interested in how Provisio's advisory services and Amitis can boost your organization with fresh strategy, contact us at provisiopartners.com. A link to our website is in the show description. And be sure to subscribe to this podcast to catch the next episode of Sparking Innovation. Thank you for listening.